My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of humans during the fascinating times when the desire of ages, Jesus the Messiah, came to this earth. And they're collected in this book, Victory of the Warrior King, the story of the life of Jesus. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended. ELIHU ben MALCHUS, Jericho. Yeshua of Nazareth is coming, a youngster shouted as he ran down the street. ELIHU turned to his father.
May I go? He asked. I'd like to see him.
The boy had heard of the teacher, but had not had a chance to listen to him in the throng-filled temple and teeming city of Jerusalem. Now his family was visiting relatives in Jericho, and the Galilean was also in town. Here at last was his chance to hear him. Malchus frowned.
You may go, but don't get involved with that group. He's a troublemaker. That's what I've heard, ELIHU said, but I just want to see him.
His father nodded.
Yes, but keep your distance and don't become a disciple of his.
ELIHU laughed.
You raised me better than that, Father.
I hope so. As a servant of a high priest, I've tried to give you nothing but the best education, so mind you, don't forget it all around this preacher. I hear he's almost as charismatic as that John fellow who baptized down by the river before Herod had his head chopped off.
I'll be careful, Father,
he said, and then ran down the street. The crowd was huge, and people shoved against each other. ELIHU tried to wiggle his way through to the front, but no one would let anyone else through. Then the boy tripped, and for a moment terror gripped him. The crowd kept right on pushing and stepping on him.
Help me! Help me!
He screamed, but no one seemed to hear. Finally, he clawed at a man's robe and used it to pull himself up.
No one is worth getting trampled to death to see,
he thought to himself as he pushed his way over to the side. The crowd was still moving in his direction. He looked quickly to the left and right. Not far away was a sycamore fig tree that leaned its branches out over the road. Dusting himself off, ELIHU sprinted toward the tree and swung up onto a low overhanging branch. Suddenly he started, as he realized he was not alone. He caught his breath sharply. What should he do? He was sharing a tree with the most hated man in town, Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Everyone knew that tax collectors were collaborators with the Romans, but if that wasn't enough, Zacchaeus was known for charging double and blackmailing people who owed taxes just to line his own pockets. The tax collector nodded in greeting to him. ELIHU looked the other way as he had been taught.
What a creepy little man, he thought. Perhaps God has punished him for his sins by not allowing him to grow very tall.
Then he chuckled to himself. Of course, that was probably why Zacchaeus was in the tree, for the same reason as ELIHU. He couldn't see over the crowd either. They both sat in silence on the branch in anticipation, waiting for Yeshua of Nazareth to pass below so that they could get a good look at him. Sure enough, the crowd went by directly under the tree. Zacchaeus seemed to be trying to make himself smaller and hide among the dusty leaves as he peered at the famous teacher. Suddenly, the crowd stopped. Yeshua looked straight up into the tree, right at the tax collector. Zacchaeus, he said, come down. I'm on my way to your house for dinner. ELIHU's jaw dropped, as did that of Zacchaeus. The boy couldn't believe it. A renowned teacher who traveled all over the country was going to have dinner with a national traitor? Quickly, ELIHU climbed to another branch as Zacchaeus scrambled down out of the tree. The little man joined Yeshua, and the crowd moved on. For a long time, ELIHU sat in his leafy perch, thinking.
Why would the rabbi have dinner with a tax collector? Did he not know the little man's profession? Or more amazing yet, if he did, was he trying to show the rest of the crowd that he accepted Zacchaeus anyway?
The boy shook his head in puzzlement. Yeshua seemed a likable man. Certainly the crowds flocked to him. What was it about him? Again, Elihu shook his head. He wasn't sure, but he had to get home before supper, or Father would be worried. Sarah, Simon's home, Bethany. The whole town buzzed with excitement. Their most important citizen, Simon the Pharisee, was planning a feast. It was going to be a huge party, and he had hired several local young people to serve the guests. Sarah was one of them. Until 2 weeks ago, she would have been delighted with the prospect of serving important guests in the fanciest house in town. Yet now it tied her stomach in knots at just the idea of going there. As she stood in the kitchen area waiting with the others for her serving instructions, her mind kept going back to her friend Leah sobbing in her arms.
"No one will ever marry me now," the girl cried. "I'm a disgrace to my family. I don't know what to do."
Sarah had tried to comfort her the best she could, but she hadn't known what to do either. She knew that according to the law of Moses, the person who did this to her friend should either take her to wife or pay a heavy fine. But he was Simon the Pharisee, so likely nothing would happen except that Leah was in disgrace. Sure enough, Leah's family had been tight-lipped about the whole thing, but the next day, Leah was gone. When Sarah had asked about her, her mother had just said, "She has gone to stay with her aunt." Sarah grieved over the loss of her friend and hated Simon for it, and now she was in his house to serve at his feast. She had told her father that she didn't want to, but he merely said, "It is an honor, and you will go." So she did. As she carried the first tray of food into the banquet room, she almost dropped it in surprise. There at the head of the table near Simon was his honored guest, Yeshua. The teacher looked right at her and smiled, filling her with confusion. Who was this man? Lazarus was a guest at the table too. She couldn't forget the day that Yeshua had resurrected Lazarus. If Yeshua had raised him from the dead minutes after his death, some might have questioned whether Lazarus had really died. But the man had been dead and buried for days. Her mind was a jumble of confusion the whole evening as she moved mechanically back and forth from the cooking area to the banquet chamber. Her back ached, but she still had more trays to carry. She lifted another to her shoulder and entered the dining area when something startled her. It was a beautiful and familiar aroma. What was it? As she moved toward the table, she suddenly recognized it as perfume, the kind used to embalm bodies. She remembered it now from Lazarus' funeral. It was the same scent, except much stronger. Suddenly, she figured out where it was coming from. Mary, Lazarus' sister, had slipped into the room and poured it over Yeshua's feet. Then, realizing she had no towel with her, she wiped it with her long hair. Sarah was horrified. Letting her hair down in public was an admission to the whole crowd what type of woman Mary was, for no respectable woman would do such a thing. But then Yeshua must know that if he had healed her. Sarah glanced at Simon. As she placed the food from the tray on the table, she heard him whispering to another guest, "If he knew what kind of woman she was, he wouldn't let her touch his feet." Mary looked at Yeshua. He had heard it too. Then Mary's eyes met Simon's. Suddenly Sarah froze. The look on Mary's face was the same as that on Leah's face when she had stumbled into Sarah's house sobbing and bleeding. Could it be? Had Mary become the kind of woman she was because of what Simon had done to her when she was younger? "Simon, I have a question for you," Yeshua said, breaking the tense silence. Snatching her tray back, Sarah stumbled from the room, Mary following quietly behind her, her sleeve hiding her face. Sarah faced her. "Mary, I'm so sorry." She wrapped her arms around the woman, and they both began to sob. "I'm so sorry I was mean to you. I didn't know. I never knew. I didn't understand. Yeshua has forgiven me for everything," Mary managed to say between sobs, "and he's healed me. It's just, I don't understand why he came to Simon's house. He healed Simon of leprosy. Did you know that?" Sarah shook her head. "It was in the early stages, but Yeshua healed him.
I don't understand why, but I'll always love him for bringing me away from that terrible life. The perfume, Sarah suddenly realized. That was your savings.
Mary nodded.
The money I made in Magdala. I needed to invest it in something or hide it in some way so it wouldn't be stolen from me. So I bought this alabaster box and this expensive perfume. But I can't think of anyone I would rather have used it for.
The two women slipped out of the kitchen and sat in the moonlight, comforting each other. I watched them and was sorry they didn't hear what Yeshua said to the Pharisee. Simon, he had said, if two servants owed a rich man money, one of them a small amount and the other a great amount, and he forgave them both, which one would love him more?
I suppose the one whom he forgave more,
Simon reluctantly acknowledged, his eyes meeting Yeshua's, and then dropping to the floor. And he got the point. I could tell from way over here where I stood with the weeping women. Without exposing his sin to any of the other guests, Yeshua let Simon know that he knew. How kind he was, how patient with fragile human egos. I was amazed. David, BETHPHAGE. David strode confidently into the village, with his young son on his shoulders and his father beside him. Life was good. They had returned to Bethlehem and repaired the broken-down home that father had abandoned so many years before. The roof had fallen in with the rains, but the stonework was as sound as it had ever been. To David's amazement, the gold coins, given to him so many years ago by the wealthy men who came to honor the baby, still remained hidden under the loose stones in the hearth. That was just enough for them to start their life again. Now it was almost time for Passover, and they were able to afford to make the trip to Jerusalem. They even had enough extra money to buy a donkey. One of the travelers on the road had told David about a young colt in the village of Bethphage.
Just think,
he said to little Jonathan on his shoulders.
If we buy a little donkey for you, you won't have to ride on my shoulders all the way home.
Or walk, grandfather added. Jonathan giggled. The family with the colt for sale was not difficult to find. They struck a deal, and money changed hands.
Daddy, I'm hungry, the child complained.
Well, I am too, his grandfather replied. Perhaps we can buy some food here in this town and have some lunch before we finish our journey. Then we need to get to Jerusalem and rent space to stay for Passover.
David nodded.
Yeah, I want to get a room before the crowds arrive, but let's find some lunch first.
They tied the donkey to a little post next to a woman selling bread and curds of cheese. Just then they noticed a large group of men approaching. One of them hurried ahead and came straight to David and his family. David recognized him as one of Yeshua's disciples.
The Lord has need of your colt, he told the young man.
David and his father broke into smiles as he untied the colt and handed her reins to the man. She had never been ridden before, and David and his father knew that an ancient tradition said that the Messiah would arrive on a colt.
Look at this, David said to his father as the disciple led the colt hurriedly back to the group. We're here just at the right time. We're going to see the Messiah crowned king.
The king, little Jonathan repeated, clapping his hands.
I want to see the king. When can I ride the donkey?
The king is going to ride our donkey, his father replied.
Pulling out a knife, he whacked off some branches from a low-growing palm next to the road.
Here's a little one for you, my son. We're going to a coronation.
The word spread, and soon other travelers and villagers filled the road, waving branches and shouting, Hosanna! Hosanna! Oh, save! Oh, save! And there in the center rode the Messiah on David's new colt.
What an honor,
David thought, as he shouted with the rest of the crowd. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
David, grandfather said several days later, somehow we have this huge room just for the three of us. His son laughed.
Yeah, it is large, but it's what was available.
When I go to the temple today, grandfather continued,
if I run across any of the other lepers whom Jesus healed along with us, I think I'll bring 'em back to celebrate the Passover with us. We have so much room."
"That's a good idea. While you buy the lamb to take to the temple, I will fetch water and buy unleavened bread and bitter herbs in the market, so that we will have everything ready for the evening meal."
"Excellent," Grandfather said. "I'll take young Jonathan with me. It will be hard for you to balance a water jug along with the other purchases while keeping track of him."
"Are we going to see Yeshua at the temple?" Jonathan asked.
"I don't know," Grandfather answered. "He goes there quite often and teaches during the daytime."
"We're going to see Yeshua," the boy shouted.
"He might not be there," David cautioned. "I heard he caused a real incident yesterday. He threw out the money changers again and several of the priests who were cheating the people." Grandfather laughed.
"Good for him. There are good priests, but too many of them are just dishonest leeches feeding off people who bring what little they have to God."
David nodded. "Yeah, and if Yeshua of Nazareth is the Messiah, he has every right to clean out his house." They all nodded. Jonathan clapped his hands.
"Yeshua rode my donkey. Can we give Yeshua another ride on my donkey?"
"Not today," Grandfather said, picking him up. "Passover is coming, and you're going to learn all about that. Come on, little one." The older man and the little boy left hand in hand to purchase a lamb, while David picked up a large water jug and headed down the steps toward the well in the Kidron Valley. They were fortunate to have been able to rent the whole upper room of a house, and he hoped his father would find some friends to share it with. It didn't take long for David to get the things he needed in the market, and balancing the full water jug, he headed back toward their rented room. On the way, two men approached him. Again, they looked familiar.
"The Master says that his time has come, and he wants to celebrate the Passover at your place with his disciples,"
one of them told him. David broke into a huge smile. Strange how he had run into Yeshua's disciples still another time. "It is prepared. Come, I'll show you where I am staying. How did you pick me?" David asked the taller of the two men.
"The Master told us to look for a man carrying water," he replied. "And by the way, my name is Peter."
"Good to meet you, Peter," David laughed. "I guess it is unusual to see a man carrying water. After all, it is women's work. It's just that in our family we have no women right now. I think all men should be widowed for a short period of time before they get married. It'd make them appreciate their women a whole lot more." Peter and the other disciple laughed.
"Yes, but it's hard to be widowed if you weren't married first."
As they entered the rented room, Peter and John looked around.
"Oh, this will be great," they said.
"I have food for the supper," David explained, "and my father's on the way back from buying a lamb. We'll get it roasting. Everything will be ready for tonight."
"Excellent, excellent," they said. "We will join you later."
The Passover supper was wonderful. David and his father enjoyed having company to share the dinner with, and they fit in well, for Yeshua and his disciples were also without any wives that week, although David knew some of them were married. When the Passover dinner ended, the disciple named Judas slipped out, apparently to take care of some business, while Yeshua and his other disciples sat chatting. David scooped up his son and went to the far end of the room and unrolled his sleeping mat. There he sat leaning against the wall, snuggling and gently rocking the child and humming a little song. Ever since his wife had died, David had done this every night. It was their bedtime ritual. He heard snatches of the conversation between Yeshua and his disciples at the other end of the room. It was a little confusing to him without hearing the whole thing. It almost sounded as if the teacher was planning to leave or die or something. David would have to ask him about it later. His son's curly little head had fallen on David's chest. Although the child was asleep, David continued to hold him and rested his own head against the wall with his eyes closed. "I'm giving you a new commandment," he heard Yeshua say to his disciples. "I want you to love each other the way that I have loved you, and I want you to treat each other the way that I have treated you. This is how other people will know that you're my disciple. Not by the clothes you wear, the things you eat, or the way you quote scripture, but by the way you treat other people." The disciples nodded. Then Yeshua took some of the unleavened bread. I want to make a new covenant with you. Breaking the bread, he passed it to each of them and said, This is my body. I'm giving it for you. The disciples stared at him wide-eyed. David opened his eyes too. Then Yeshua picked up the cup of wine and passed it to them, saying, Drink all of it. This is my blood, which is shed for you. The disciples soberly passed it around, each one taking a sip. Why are they doing that? David wondered. He didn't understand. Then Yeshua continued, I will not drink any more wine until the day I come and take you home. I want you to do this in memory of me. Every time you drink the juice of the grape and eat the unleavened bread, you'll remember me and what I've done for you, and look forward to going home with me. I wonder where he's going, David thought sleepily.
This broadcast has come from the book Victory of the Warrior King by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.